welcome to my channel. Pepper also welcomes you. Say hi, Pepper. Today I'm going to make this puffy dress. I'm hacking my pattern, my Ann Puff wrap. I saw this dress on Pinterest and thought it was really beautiful. And then I found a really nice bed sheet at the thrift store. So without further ado, let's get into it. I found a queen sheet set at the thrift store, washed it thoroughly of course, and this is the fabric I'm going to be using for the dress. I also have some white thread and some elastic for the ruffle sleeve hem. The dress I am trying to imitate has a puffy ruffle hem sleeve. The top is a wrap construction and the skirt has a yoke with a front curve to it and ruffles with a front curve as well. My Ann Puffy Wrap blouse is a wrap top with front side darts and back waist darts, a 3/4 length cuffed puffy sleeve with a panel for contrasting fabric on the underside of the sleeve. The wrap ties are attached to the base of the front bodice, and the seam allowance is 1/2 inch everywhere on the pattern. We're going to make some easy alterations to this pattern, and I am working with a size 8. To begin, lengthen the front bodice by 2 inches. Extend the angle of the side seam to this new length, and at the other edge make a right angle for where the wrap tie will attach. Shorten the length of the left and right wrap tie at the far notch, not the center front notch, which is indicated by an abbreviated CF. Since we have lengthened the bodice, we also need to lengthen the front facing. Next, cut your undersleeve right down the center and attach to the top sleeve on either side, with the double notches lining up. I overlap it 1 inch to eliminate the 1/2 inch seam allowance on both pieces. For the skirt yoke, you're going to start by creating a rectangle. The width is the front width of your bodice hem. Make sure you mark the center front notch location on your rectangle. The height is however long you want the skirt yoke to be. Divide the width to the left of your center front line into 4 relatively equal portions. Cut out this rectangle and cut up these lines just shy of the top of the rectangle. Put this aside and on another piece of paper draw a vertical line. Mark the top, which will be your waist, and mark down the length from your waist to hip. Draw a perpendicular line at this point that is 1/4 of the width of your hip girth. Place your center front line along this line and spread the divided portions to create a flare. Make sure you spread it a bit beyond your hip guideline so that it won't be too tight in that area. Smooth out the waist and hem, adding 1/2 inch seam allowance. Also create a curve in the center front portion. For the back, you can trace out the portion to the left of your center front line. This will be the back skirt, which you will place on fold to get the full width. You may have to adjust this piece as it will be a bit bigger in the waist than the back darted bodice. The result is one side of your front wrap skirt yoke. You'll be cutting 2 of these. I ended up cutting 4 because I wanted to face this area as well. Next, we are creating the ruffle. I have determined that I want my ruffle to start 3 inches from the top of my skirt yoke, so I mark a notch there. Measure from that point to the side seam of the skirt. My measurement was 21.5 inches. I created a rectangle that width and made it as long as I wanted my ruffle. I made this entire 21.5 by 14 inch portion curved at the hem. Then I multiplied the 21.5 by 3 to get the full ruffle for the front. That length was 64.5 inches. So instead of wasting that much paper, I created the curved portion and then just made a note to add the rest of the length. For the back ruffle, I measured the back yoke hem. This is only half of the back yoke, so I multiplied that measurement by 2. Then that final measurement of the full back yoke, I multiplied by 3, just as I did with the front. And that ended up being a whopping 79.5 inches, so I just made a note on my back yoke piece to cut out a rectangle with the width of 79.5 inches and the length of 14 inches. And so there are my super easy skirt pieces. Time to cut. Bed sheets are excellent for garments with lots of gathers. The width of my queen sheet was 89 inches, so I knew it would accommodate my very large ruffles. I started by cutting my back ruffle, which is 79.5 inches by 14. I cut out my front as well, cutting the curve with the guide. Make sure that you snip all of your notches. I used only one queen flat sheet for the entire dress and still had this much left over. So here are all of my pieces cut. We've got the front wrap skirt, the back wrap skirt, the front and back with their facings, the waist wrap ties, the massive sleeve, the front ruffle, and the back ruffle. Begin by sewing the darts on the front bodice and the back bodice. Iron the front bodice dart bulk toward the hem and the back bodice darts towards the center. Overlock all your pieces in the highlighted areas that I am showing you. With right sides together, sew the shoulder seams of the front and back bodice. Similarly, sew the shoulder seams of the front and back facings. Make sure the raw edge of the facing is toward the center. Mark 3 inches up on your sleeve hem. Slightly gather this area with your largest stitch so that the width will match the length of your stretched elastic. Attach your elastic on the wrong side of the sleeve to each sleeve hem. Sew 2 rows of your largest stitch in the seam allowance of your sleeve cap between the front and back notches. I like to mark my shoulder notch with a pin so that it doesn't get lost in the gathers. Then gather your sleeve cap. Open up your front bodice so that the right sides face up and pin your sleeves right sides together, matching the front, shoulder, and back notches, and sew. With right sides together, sew your front skirt yoke to your front bodice. Next, take your front ruffle piece and turn over the edge 1/4 and 1/4, just for the front portion. You don't have to do the whole thing. Then sew 2 rows of your largest stitch along the top and gather to match the skirt yoke from the front notch to the side seam. Then place the ruffle and skirt yoke right sides together and sew. Apply your wrap ties to the edge of the bodice and skirt. It doesn't matter which side you put them on. The short wrap is the one that gets wrapped on top and the long wrap is the underlayer. Next, apply your back skirt yoke to the base of the back bodice. Mine was too wide since I based it on the front skirt, so I just trimmed it off and re-overlocked the edges. Once that is attached, take your back hem ruffle piece, sew 2 rows of your largest stitch to the top. I stopped and restarted my stitches in the middle so that it was easier to gather each half of the skirt. Face your gathered skirt to the back skirt yoke hem right sides together and sew. Just a reminder that all seams are 1/2 inch unless you have drafted them otherwise. I chose to face the front skirt yoke, so I am attaching the base of my front facing to the top innermost edge of the skirt yoke facing. Then with right sides together, I sew this entire piece to the neckline and around the skirt yoke with the ruffle folded up inside of it. If you choose not to include the skirt yoke facing, just attach the front and back assembled facing and continue as shown, just disregard the skirt yoke portion. Trim the facing seam allowance at 1/4 inch just around the neckline, not the skirt yoke. Also clip the curve of the back neckline. Turn it out and then understitch the facing from the start of the skirt ruffle all the way around. Secure your facing at the shoulders by sewing it in the ditch of the seam. Line up the edge of your skirt yoke facing with the outer yoke and bodice seam and stitch in the seam in the face of the garment, catching the skirt yoke facing on the back. For some reason, I folded down the seam allowance of the skirt yoke facing, but this is totally unnecessary. Just flatten the seam and line it up with the top seam. It's much easier. Now that everything is assembled, we can place the front and back in its entirety from sleeve hem to ruffled hem, right sides together, and sew up the side seams. Just remember to leave a small gap open on the opposite side of your long waist tie, so that the long waist tie will be able to go through and wrap around the back of the dress. Before finishing the hem of the skirt and sleeve, I tried it on. I realized that on me the sleeves were a bit too long for this particular style. The curve of the skirt yoke was too square, and the yoke was too long, making the dress altogether longer than I had intended. So, crazy as I am, I seam ripped the side seams and front yoke. I recut the yoke shorter front and back and resewed it. I also shortened the sleeve by 3 inches, resewed the elastic 3 inches up, and then sewed it all back together. I finished the dress by turning over the hem 1/4 and 1/4, and the sleeve hem 1/8 and 1/8 with my hem roller, and finally I was ready to wear it.
Like and subscribe if you want to see more, because this is a good channel to watch to learn to sew, okay?